So, Real Time with Bill Maher returned after its 2017 season finale, and I shouldn't do this to myself, but I watched it. I watched the last episode, and even though I know I'm going to be disappointed, I used to just really look forward to Bill Maher's program because he would say things that were refreshing, that I think political pundits needed to say, but now he's basically become one of the hackiest members of the American media. So this week, I was pleasantly surprised to see that he invited a real progressive on the show for the first time in I don't know how long. So Congressman Ro Khanna was there, who actually is a real progressive that supports Medicare for All, that doesn't have a super PAC, that actually supports progressives. But Ro Khanna's presence didn't stop Bill Maher from making comments that were just brazenly ignorant. And as a so-called member of the resistance, Bill Maher finally admitted that he's not too down on at least one of the recent policies that Donald Trump decided to implement. So as you all know, last year, one of the last things the Trump administration did was declare Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And Bill Maher admits here, I kind of like what Trump is doing here.
While we're near the Middle East, let me ask about a big story that happened while we were off in December. Donald Trump. Today, we finally acknowledge the obvious that Jerusalem is Israel's capital. He said Israel is a sovereign nation with the right, like any other sovereign nation, to determine its own capital. I hate to agree with Donald Trump, and it doesn't happen often, but I do. I don't know why Israel, it has been their capital since 1949. It is where their government is. They've won all the wars thrown against them. I don't understand why they don't get to have their capital where they want.
Really? You don't understand?
Oh, I understand there are repercussions.
I mean, first of all, when you win a war, you don't get to take the other side's land, right, under international law.
Actually, you do.
Under international law, you don't
especially when they were attacked. The country was divided, which they were okay with. They were attacked more than once, and they took land in those wars that they won. And there has been peace offers on the table ever since to give part of that land back.
But here's the thing. I mean, Trump says he's going to strengthen American national interest. Now, there are 128 countries, including Britain, France, Germany, India, who voted against us. If we are going to do this, there's a cost. What did we get? What did we get for doing this? I mean, he's the deal maker in chief. What are we getting in America?
What happened for the 50 years before? I mean, this has been a fact on the ground for 50 years. I mean, Israel has been a state for 70, I think, right?
I mean, it is the capital of Israel. Okay, I recognize Ro's point that if we're going to be an arbiter in this peace process, that just declaring this without having, trying to use that as a point of leverage in those debates, in those discussions, might have given away a card that we would have held. Now, I don't think though that that this is going to fundamentally alter the conditions on the ground there, because the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian government is so collapsed in terms of being an effective political force in the process that the status quo is going to be the status quo for the foreseeable future.
But the problem is the message that it sent to everyone in the process. So it sends a message to the Palestinians that the United States is going to be even more pro-Israel than in the past, and it sends a message to the Likud government that you can basically do what you want. And so they responded by adopting a resolution essentially calling for the annexation of the West Bank. Right? They passed legislation that would make it much harder to come to any sort of final status agreement on Jerusalem. And they've done all these things that are going to make a two-state solution impossible.
That's just it right there. I'm so glad that the panel brought those points up, because we've become so unequivocally pro-Israel that we've created a barrier to peace. Because, of course, if there's any negotiations, we're going to want to be involved. The United States won't butt out. And if we have anything to do with negotiations, do you think that Palestine would want to come to the table? Of course not. They'd be dumb to do so, because they know that we're not looking out for their best interests. We're looking out for Israel's interests. So of course, this makes a two-state solution or any type of peace deal that much more unlikely. That's why it's harmful. You can't just declare a disputed territory as one country's capital and expect to still present yourself as a neutral arbiter during negotiations. That's not the way things work, and that's not how things should work. So obviously what Donald Trump did is he created a barrier to peace. Now, what Bill Maher also said was really shocking to me. As someone who is a liberal, he defended the idea that when you win a war, you get to take your opponent's land. But that's not true at all, and not only is it factually incorrect and against international law, it's an antiquated way of thinking about the world generally speaking. The so-called right of conquest was abandoned a very long time ago in favor of the assurance that every state in the world would maintain territorial integrity irrespective of the outcome of wars. And this is now codified into international law, not just in the UN Charter, but also in the Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1928, which says states cannot use war as a means of resolving disputes. And the reason why the entire world decided to move on from that standard is because, one, it's just immoral, and two, if you accept that by winning wars you get to take land as part of the reward for winning war, you're incentivizing militarism. And with just how militaristic the United States government is, can you imagine if that was still not prohibited under international law? The entire world would be America right now because we'd see non-stop wars being waged to an even greater extent than now. So it's an idiotic assertion for a so-called liberal like Bill Maher to make, and furthermore, it speaks to Bill Maher's profound ignorance when it comes to the Arab-Israeli conflict because Israel has continuously taken more and more land from Palestine. It's not just that they've taken more land after each war, they literally just announced a plan to annex even more territory from the West Bank last fucking week, Bill. Even Donald Trump saw that Israel's continued building of settlements in the West Bank was a problem, and he even told Netanyahu to hold off on settlements. So embarrassingly enough, Donald Trump seems to know a little bit more about the Arab-Israeli conflict than Bill Maher, someone who is a member of the resistance, who's supposed to be against Donald Trump. Well, here he is agreeing with Donald Trump and presumably knowing less than Donald Trump based on what he said here. But if you thought that that was as ignorant as Bill Maher would get during this segment, unfortunately, it got even worse.
How is they're making the two-state solution impossible? But what is making the central thing that is making the two-state solution impossible is that one party is perpetually hostile, a coiled snake.
That's what's going on. You should go and see what's happening in the West Bank. If you look at the settlements, if you look at the facts on the ground, the fact that you have basically, instead of a contiguous landmass, you increasingly have these little cantons. Yes. And if you looked at the way that Palestinians, most Palestinians alive today were not born during any of these wars, and so the idea that their lives should be blighted because of them. I mean, if you look at what Americans do when they have to go through a TSA checkpoint, right? They completely lose their shit. And if you imagine doing that for 2 hours every single day,
but this is always what happens. We talk about what happened as a result. We don't look at the beginning of it. Like the Israelis just put up those checkpoints for no reason. They put up those checkpoints because there was an intifada, and they were having bombings every day. A pizza parlor or a bus stop was getting blown up. That's why they built it,
no, that's
not for known reason.
No, but also because they want to take that land. I mean, they're not putting up the settlements for self-defense. Yes. They're putting up the settlements because they want to have greater Israel, and they're going to get it.
Some of them
they're going to get it, where there's going to be a one-state solution. So then the question is, what is that one state?
Right.
Is it Jewish or is it democratic? Because it can't be both.
Absolutely, and that is a big problem. But when people say like the gun is to Israel's head, it is a problem.
But Bill, where are the Yitzhak Rabins and Shimon Perez's in Israel? I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu has done Israel's cause no service in this country. I mean, what we need is people who are... Israel has had leaders before who've talked about their values and talked about the two-state solution.
It's a little different when you live in that hostile environment. I think
you're a rich person. You should go see what life in the West Bank is like. Go to Hebron. Go and see it.
First of all, you don't have to go to understand this. I'm not a moron. I can understand.
No, but I feel like it's hard to really get your head around how bad it is unless you see it with your own eyes.
I understand that, but Israel...
You think they shouldn't be building new settlements, right?
Probably not. But Israel gave back Gaza, and what was the result? Did they use the funds to build schools and hospitals? No, they used them to build tunnels, to get weapons in. They invited Hamas to shell Israel across the border. I mean, Gaza
once you have Hamas as the power player in the Palestinian movement, you've basically got implacable hostility. You basically got, and we can say some of it's justified because of the Israeli expansions, but a lot of it is drive the Jews into the sea, burn them to the ground, and you can't. Those aren't. That's not a partnership where you've got people dealing from an equitable space.
But that's why you don't cut the balls off of the Palestinian moderates, the people who are running the West Bank.
I have to cut the balls off this discussion, but it was very enlightening. Thank you very much. But it's time for new rules, everybody.
Okay, yeah. So Bill Maher says that Israel is always blamed for making a two-state solution possible when one party is perpetually hostile. First of all, it's incumbent on Israel to come to the table and negotiate because they're the ones who are currently violating international law and illegally occupying Palestine. It's on them. They can choose to end this at any time if they decide to stop their illegal occupation, but they haven't done that. Palestine has really no say. And even though nobody would deny that Hamas is hostile, in Israel's 2014 incursion into Gaza, more than 2,000 people were killed, most of which were civilians, and that included 490 children. Not to mention 3,000 Palestinian children were also wounded, more than 20,000 homes were destroyed, and 500,000 people were displaced as a result of Israel's incursion into Gaza. So if you're going to denounce violence, Bill, which you should and we all should, don't conveniently overlook the violence being carried out by Israel. Now he also states here, Israel gave back Gaza and they built tunnels to get weapons in. Okay, that's true. But they also use those tunnels to transport vital supplies, food. These tunnels, even if they do use them to transport weapons, you could make the case that these are necessary because Palestinians have no control over Gaza. They have no control over imports and exports. Nobody gets in or out of Gaza unless Israel says so. And there's a reason why Noam Chomsky referred to it as the world's largest open-air prison, because it effectively is. So Bill Maher, I knew that he was very pro-Israel, in fact, arbitrarily pro-Israel, unnecessarily pro-Israel. He can't even be objective at all here. He just, anything Israel does ever is okay. That's his stance effectively. That's been his stance effectively. But that's wrong. However, for having to suffer through Bill Maher's idiotic diatribe, his ignorant diatribe, we got a really great line at the end. So the journalist from New York Times there states, Bill, you're a rich person. You should go see what life is like in the West Bank. And that's just it. You know, it's easy to watch the biased mainstream media and come to the conclusions that they arrive at and to just accept whatever's fed to you by mainstream news outlets. But unless you really dive into the details and take a nuanced approach and try to learn about what's really going on there, then you're not going to learn. And you wonder why the rest of the world thinks we're a joke and disagrees with us, and why 128 countries at the UN denounced Donald Trump's declaration of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. It's because somehow the rest of the world figured out that Israel is effectively an apartheid state, but we haven't gotten the memo yet. Bill Maher is towing the line of not just neoliberals, but neoconservatives here. So he should be embarrassed to call himself a member of the so-called resistance, because the resistance, they've shown time and again that they're jokes. They don't really resist Trump where it matters. You know, they're there to condemn him when he says naughty words, but when it comes to the policies, he's doing everything that they want him to do. So yeah, you know, I don't know what I expected from watching Bill Maher, but certainly I couldn't not speak out about this, because Bill Maher, as a member of the resistance, you're doing a piss-poor job resisting, Bill.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.